On today's World Insight, power shortage in northeast China amid a big push for clean energy. Are brownouts the serious side effect of the green shift? That's up for debate. Huawei exec Meng Wanzhou home safe and sound after the U.S. dropped an extradition request. Some see this as the starting point in a new direction in China-U.S. relations. Is that too optimistic? And Hong Kong back in business, leaving behind troubles on the streets after carrying out the national security law. What's the outlook?
Here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. At the just concluded 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly, Chinese President Xi Jinping announced the stepping up support for other developing countries in promoting green and low-carbon energy and ruled out building new coal-fired power projects abroad, another practical step after pledging to peak carbon emissions by 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. While there are discussions on new power regulations in China, residents in northeastern part of the country have suffered recently power cuts as an electricity shortage, which initially hit factories, spread to homes. Brownouts are widening amid rising coal prices and a push to enforce environmental regulations. The power crunch has also affected more than a dozen provinces and cities across China. Could new environmental regulations seriously affect the power supply in China? And is China's story alone, or rather, also you see similar stories elsewhere in the world? For answers, let's loop in our panelists. For the story about China power shortage and carbon goals, joining us in Boston, Michael Melling, Deputy Director of the Center for Energy and Environmental Policy Research with Massachusetts Institute of Technology. In Beijing, Ma Jun, Director of the Institute of Public and Environmental Affairs, founder of the Blue Map app. And also in Beijing, Zhang Jianyu, Executive Director of BRI Green Development Institute. Gentlemen, what a pleasure to see all of you. Well, Mr. Ma, we haven't seen power shortage in Beijing yet, but in the Rust Belt of China, northeastern part of the country, that seems to be a mounting question. Tell me more about why it happened.
You know, with the slowing down of the economy and then the pandemic hit local government or try to again resort to highly energy and energy-intensive industries like the real estate and all behind that, all this steel manufacturing, cement and chemical and petrochemical. But in the meantime, coal supply situation have not been very much improved. We have seen the price of coal soaring in an amazing way. From just slightly more than 500 yuan to now over 1,600 yuan per ton.
Mr. Zhang, I want to go to you also about that.
I think the current challenge comes mostly from two parts. The first part is, amazingly, lots of people do not know that renewable energies, particularly wind, has accounted for a very large portion of the energy supply, particularly the power supply in the Northeast. Today, wind accounts for about 18% of the total power generation capacity in the Northeast. And because we have been having a long extended rainy days, so the wind power has only been able to generate about 10% of what it's supposed to be. The other part is the supply of the coal, which is get significantly cut down. Also, it's a good challenge, right? Because the whole country is moving to low carbon, and there have been many close downs of the coal mines for both safety and also environmental reasons, and also what we call the out of the table out of the national statistic, coal supply has been dramatically shut down. So because of these two challenges, both of the shortage of the wind supply from the renewables, and also because of the cut down of the coal supply, and a double crunch squeeze in terms of this not actually so significant gap between supply and demand. And that's where we are what we are seeing right now.
There has been a lot of administrative measures being used in terms of cutting the coal-powered energy station, and also in terms of cutting back using coal as the energy source. But whether that is being done in the right measure, with the right pace, in the right direction, some say that is questionable. Your take?
We have to seriously, restructure, not just restructure our energy mix, but restructure our industrial structure. To think about, we can continue to expand all these energy-intensive industries. We're producing 60% of the global iron and steel. We're producing much of the global aluminum, all be attracted to China. Yeah. And these are power gasoline industries, chemical and petrochemical. Think about that, Tianwei. We have to make it far more efficient.
I think about that, Mr. Ma. I also think about the jobs. And I also think about how long it would take for this transition to happen, and whether the country could be able to afford that at the time of the pandemic, when you have quite difficult situation. I think we think about one side, we also need to think about the other side. That is the point, isn't it, Mr. Zhang? Let me have your input here too.
On the economic side, I think you will need to think more seriously about demand side management. I think that you cannot just put a straight face saying that I want to use electricity to the maximum of my need. Is it really necessary? Is it really necessary for you to keep your air conditioning on all the time? Is it really necessary for people to have to work during the day and not work at night so as to have different shifts to even out the power demand? I think that's one side that needs to consider. On the other side, the environmentalists also need to think about, we're still in the transition. Clearly, both the case in the UK, the shutdown of the grid back to 2019, and also we're facing right now in China, is a good challenge, right? It put us in a new situation of, if we're going to have a larger, increasingly larger portion of supply from renewables, wind, solar, what are going to do with the rainy days that we're dealing with right now? So is it really necessary, critical for us to shut down all the coal-fired power plants so that we're not going to have enough base load to have this kind of a great damage to people's life? I think just both sides need to think about this issue facing this new challenge, but I still think we have the solution.
It's not just China, but the electricity price in Europe, for example, in North America, we have seen quite some growth, particularly in Europe. The growth of more than 150% in some of the countries. So how do you see this global energy transition? Too fast, too abrupt?
Well, I would first maybe observe, and I think it's important to remind ourselves that we have had energy crises in the past long before climate policy was an issue. Think of the 1970s. So a lot of it is, of course, innate to the energy system. The hydrocarbons, in a pandemic, for instance, production ceases, goes down, and then when the economy revamps, it takes time to ramp up the production again. So some of this is really not, you cannot blame it all on climate policy and the transition. That said, there's no question that shifting to renewables, which are variable by nature, which are not as predictable, are not baseload in many cases, does increase risks. And I think resilience and, well, of course, balancing of variable or intermittent sources are challenges in every jurisdiction, whether it's North America, whether it's Europe, they are challenges, and we have to deal with that. But I think that the irony is that in the short term, this will be difficult. We have to talk about better grid interconnection, better transmission, better storage infrastructure. All these things are challenges. In the long run, though, once we get to a stable decarbonized electricity system, we actually become more independent of fuel prices, for instance. The price of coal, the price of gas, that will no longer be an issue because wind and sun are free. So it's really sort of this transition period that's the difficult one that we have to get through.
And I'm very interested in this transitional period. This is where the fascinating things are happening. We have to use innovation, of course, technology advancement, that's for sure. But what about building a system and understanding there's a rational approach toward the goals, rather than let's just make a decision and let's just get there. And, things doesn't work that way. So, Mr. Melling, maybe you can also provide to us the case study in the United States.
So I think from what I understand, the curtailment and the supply shortages that you're facing in China are very much due to the economics and the physics of the grid. The blackout that we had in Texas and in parts of the south of the US this past winter, which were very dramatic and caused huge economic damage, and also, of course, influenced politics, influenced how the public perceives energy system, the importance of the energy system, of energy prices, and of resilience of the energy system. That was very much due to weather. But many say that it was due to changes that are exacerbated by climate, the polar vortex that has drawn very cold temperatures so far south in the United States, where they normally are not expected and where the physical infrastructure is not prepared, is not resilient to such temperatures. So in a way, ironically, again, it's the climate change that has caused some of these problems. And the politics is very complex. Some immediately wanted to blame it on wind. It turns out that it was also and primarily fossil fuels, so natural gas infrastructure, where the infrastructure just froze up and couldn't supply anymore. And prices skyrocketed to levels that were absolutely beyond the pale, really. I mean, some households faced costs for 1 day of electricity use of $10,000 or more. So it shows sort of the real challenges, the real economic challenges, and the social challenges, and the political challenges that can come in this transition.
Right. So now, gentlemen, it seems that we all agree there has to be a balance that needs to be kept about how to make sure there's sustainable supply of electricity, for example, for ordinary people's lives. Their quality of life would not be changed as a result of the abrupt change of the supply possibilities. On the other hand, of course, the goals for China 2030, 2060 needs to be kept also for the rest of the world as well when it comes to climate change commitment. But how? That how is becoming very crucial. And that how probably is the thing that we need to work on today. So, Mr. Ma, tell me about your version of the how.
In the northeastern part, the local government also mentioned that some of the cities would not actually, really seriously implement that policy, like in the southeastern part of China. So that's why they push themselves to this extreme kind of power shortage, power outage. And then to the people, what about electricity price? The reason for all this power companies, coal power pump companies, to have no incentives to expand their supply is because now they're suffering from massive losses, enormous losses because of the rising cost of the coal. But in the meantime, the power price cannot go up. And in the meantime, the business also, they want to behave responsibly. They need to reinstall all this, their own solar panels and their own kind of renewables as much as possible.
But have you ever counted as to how much that will be able to make up for the loss, quote unquote, of coal-powered electricity? Do we know? Or this is just a suggestion, a goodwill suggestion?
For aluminum, for those, some of the petrochemical companies, obviously this is not enough. But for some of the lighter industries, this can make up quite some proportion and can keep themselves going.
Mr. Zhang, your version of how?
On a normal situation, and I would welcome Michael's comment, for example, in the U.S., will be hard to do. But luckily, we're here in China. we have a really strong central government that can do that. And we have a really strong, tactically capable, both China grade, state grade, and also southern grade. I think they should really be fully mobilized to overcome the inherent barriers that has been buried in the system that cannot be overcome in a normal circumstance, but they should really do and should really try some of the extreme measures to make sure the power supply and its entire country is balanced.
Michael, your version of how?
Well, the first thing I'll say is it won't be easy. I think that on the one hand, climate science tells us we have to move really, really fast. But then we have all these other wishes. We want to get rid of nuclear in parts of Europe, for instance. Even in the US, there's a debate. Natural gas has become something that we're trying to phase out. We may have to rethink the pace and also the sequence in which we do that. And we may have to revisit the design, say, of electricity markets in order to ensure that we may not use natural gas or coal all the time, but we still keep some capacity to balance variable renewables during this transition phase. All in all, though, I think, in the end, it will come down to just redoubling our efforts, investing in innovation, investing in transmission infrastructure, in interconnection, in storage, all those things. And those will be expensive. And the price will be paid, whether it's by taxpayers, ratepayers, somebody pays it. So it's not going to be easy. I think it's important not to be, let's say, green-eyed about that.
I do not disagree with any of your comment, because we all know the goals are extremely important for all of us to be committed to. But at the same time, how we can start off from here till reaching there is a crucial process that we need to use a lot of wisdom. Thank you so much for your contribution. Ma Jun, Michael Melling, last but not least, Zhang Jianyu. Really appreciate it, gentlemen. Thank you. And you're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Coming up, Meng Wanzhou returned home safe and sound after the U.S. dropped the extradition request. Some suggest this could be the starting point of a shift of directions in China-U.S. relations. Is that too optimistic assessment? More debate about that after this break. Welcome back. This is World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The return of Huawei's chief financial officer Meng Wanzhou to China speaks volumes of the nation's independent foreign policy. Chinese State Councilor Foreign Minister Wang Yi ruled out bowing to hegemonic behaviors, far from afraid of any coercion. While Meng's return may be seen as a positive step in relations between China and the United States, if not a breakthrough, 8 months into the Biden presidency, is it a turning point in the U.S.-China relations, or is it too much to interpret? Besides climate action, could it lend momentum to positive bilateral interactions in the future? Let's loop in our panelists. For more on China-U.S. ties with the latest development, I'm joined by Wu Xinbo, Director of the Center for American Studies in Shanghai, in Washington, D.C., Surab Gupta, Head of the Trade and Tech Program at Institute for China-American Studies. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Mr. Gupta, from your perspective, what does Meng Wanzhou's story, the current realities, mean to China-U.S. relations?
In my view, I think it's a good story, and frankly, it means that the Biden administration, as it has been trying to do, is finding avenues to bring the relationship back on a somewhat more normal track. I think the two countries are still far apart, but nevertheless, I can see an imperceptible but incremental movement towards a more coexistent relationship, and this is, in a small way, a testimony to that.
Incremental steps. Professor Wu, agree?
Certainly, that's a very important first step in a long way to improve China-U.S. relations. To some extent, it suggests that the Biden administration may be thinking seriously about getting rid of some of the negative legacy left by the Trump administration on China-U.S. relations. So this is a good start. It also helps improve the overall atmosphere in U.S.-China relations. As we know now, the big problem, the big challenge confronting U.S.-China relations now is a huge trust deficit. Getting Meng Wanzhou back to China, I think the two sides take a very important step in improving mutual trust.
Okay.
And if we can move down the road continuously, we can expect some remarkable improvement of this relationship.
Okay. Both of you, of course, are trying to be constructive in terms of a better relationship between China and the United States over the years, but the atmosphere in Washington is not necessarily that, shall I say, satisfying in that direction. Mr. Gupta, now, how much does politics matter in this sense? Or is it all about politics, really?
I think politics matters to a very significant element. Mr. Trump had left a really poison chalice for Mr. Biden to handle. And I would say Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has mainly been playing politics, frankly, with regard to the US-China, managing the politics of the relationship while hoping that one rung below him, that at that level, at the deputy, at the Wendy Sherman level, that certain confidence could be built in the relationship.
One might take small clues from different directions on different issues. But Professor Wu, the always important question is the nature of this relationship between China and the United States. Now, earlier we already talked about that, right? China wants to set the tone for a relationship from day one, hopefully, with the help from the other side. But the U.S. is trying to go as it, play as it goes, it seems, with its own domestic politics mainly. So, Professor Wu, how do you see these two approaches will be able to meet in the middle way?
There is quite a big difference between the Chinese and the U.S. approach to this relationship. From the Chinese side, we want to define this relationship as mainly cooperative, while competition exists, but we want to make sure that's manageable and is benign competition, and also confrontation should be avoided. While on the U.S. side, they put competition out in the front as a dominant nature of this relationship, and also confrontation and to a lesser extent cooperation are also part of this relationship. So as you can tell, on the Chinese side, we have a more constructive definition of this relationship as cooperation-driven, while the U.S. one is more competition-driven. However, if each side look at the cooperation side dimension, we do have a lot of opportunities to cooperate. What's happening now, in my observation, with Biden's approach to this relationship, is that they gradually realize that while they continue to emphasize competition with China, but there is a growing demand for cooperation with China in a wide range of areas. So that explains why Biden wants to take a step forward in solving the Meng Wanzhou cases. And this very realistic and pragmatic approach to this relationship, I hope they will continue along the line down the road.
Another thing is about the technology area. As we know, the U.S. Already made it very clear this is going to be fierce competition, and there has to be camps being built against China from acquiring certain technologies and getting hold of it, quote unquote. So, Mr. Gupta, you've been researching about trade and tech programs. Tell me more about what Meng Wanzhou's case now mean for both the directions and the nature of discussions in the U.S. about this.
I'm afraid I don't think that will change too much, frankly, in terms of the direction on trade and tech, where the Biden administration will go. Let me make this point. The Trump administration's approach was, it's been talked, the jargon's been talked in terms of a very big garden with very high walls, basically to block China and squeeze China and thwart China's technological rise by blocking it from these technologies. So it would be a small garden. The walls would remain high. But that's just a matter of nuance. And the impression one gets is that more or less the Biden team is going on the lines of the Trump team, just trying to do it in a palatable way where you can bring allies together so that it doesn't become unilateral, because that doing it unilaterally becomes self-damaging to oneself.
Right.
But I also say with regard to the Meng Wanzhou case, I think the case that the Justice Department was pushing was just getting weaker and weaker and weaker. It had become a hot potato in a way, because the point had come where she was going to be perhaps soon extradited. And before it came to that, where she needed to be extradited, but the case was so weak and would just blow up things in any ways without much of a benefit. And I think that's why they got pragmatic in trying to work this deal through. So I don't see so much in news in terms of trade and technology controls coming out of this release.
Professor Wu, that's rather a realistic assessment done by Mr. Gupta?
Yes, I agree with him almost everything he said. After all, the Biden administration put technology as the core of U.S. competition with China. Even though there may be some tactical adjustments in the scope, in the type of the technology transferable to China, but overall, the U.S. is determined to maintain its superiority in this regard. And we are also trying to build this kind of coalition with its allies and friends to make sure that the U.S. win the competition with China in technology area. Even though Meng Wanzhou has returned to China safe and sound, but I guess the U.S. crackdown on Huawei will continue, and even in a more fierce way. So the implication for China is that you have no choice but to pursue the indigenous innovation and to drop the illusion about the U.S. supply of technology. And also, finally, I think China should feel confident about this competition. After all, in 10 years' time, we will be the largest economy in the world. We will be the largest market in the world. So what's the value of technology if you cannot be sold on the market? So I think that's a major trumpet that China holds in the competition with the United States.
Moving on to another direction and the final direction of questions, we witnessed the two presidents had a fascinating, apparently, according to the press release, and in-depth discussion on the phone a few weeks ago. Professor Wu, what can we expect?
I think the recent phone call by President Biden to President Xi is important. It should help Biden get a better understanding of the Chinese position on relations with the United States. It should also help get him a better sense about how to improve these relations if he wishes to pursue his agenda in relations with China. So as we can say, Meng Wanzhou's returning to China is the very first step, but a very important first step. And down the road, we should expect to see the commercial team of the two sides will meet very soon, and they will discuss how to trying to bring the bilateral economic and trade relations back to normal. After all, trade and economic relations are really the core of this relationship. They are complementary by nature, and both sides want to enhance this relationship. As I just read from the media, U.S. Secretary of Commerce just said that she wanted to lead a delegation of U.S. CEOs to China to enhance this relationship. I think that's contrasted with the Trump administration, which had worked very hard to promote decoupling of the two economies. But now in Biden administration, even though they're still trying to promote decoupling in technology, in value chain in some areas. But on the other hand, they realize that growing trade between two countries are essential to both sides. In addition to trade and economic relations, we can also enhance our dialogue and coordination on a wide range of other issues like climate change, Afghanistan, Iran, Korean Peninsula, and you name it. So if the Biden administration really adopt a more cooperation-oriented approach to this relationship, and there will be a much bright prospect for this relationship down the road.
Mr. Gupta, your thoughts?
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, there are ample areas to cooperate out here. I think of the Chinese end, frankly, there's a little bit of, we know there's mistrust in the relationship. And the problem at this point of time is that the Chinese side feels that maybe the US wants to use China in a big way this year for the next 2 or 3 months because there's this huge climate change summit coming up. And Mr. Biden had already said that, yes, we need to work with China on that. But then once that summit is over, that Mr. Biden will again go back to his antagonistic ways vis-a-vis China, because on the other areas, he's not kind of framed out where he will cooperate with China. And I understand that sense of relative mistrust then at the Chinese end as to, is Mr. Biden just trying to play us for the next couple of months, and we'll see from that. But I think there's ample avenues of cooperation, and I think it's been a little disturbing that the U.S. side has been so slow in doing its China trade policy review and coming to a decision on that, because at this point of time, the decision on whether to remove some of the tariffs, remove all the tariffs, what to do about the phase one agreement on market commitments ends up this year, what to do about it going forward next year, when do we begin a phase two negotiation on the structural issues, all these are bubbling. And I'm hoping that by the time Mr. Biden goes to Asia, if he does go to Asia for the ASEAN-wide summits, that on November 13th, which is the date of the ASEAN Business Summit, APEC Business Summit, he will have his views on Asia Pacific as well as China liberalization set in stone, and that can be a basis for further engagement.
Surab Gupta, Wu Xinbo, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us. And you're watching World Insight. Coming up, the dust over Hong Kong's business environment are slowly but surely setting the tipping point of recovery after turbulence. We will talk about that. This is World Insight with me, Tian Wei. On Monday, Hong Kong's Special Administrative Region authorities unveiled a business environment report showing Hong Kong's business environment has recovered. The Hong Kong SAR Financial Secretary said violence and unreasonable U.S. economic sanctions had a serious impact on its economy and business environment. But the national security law has laid a foundation for Hong Kong SAR's long-term stability, enabling a vibrant business environment. What are the challenges and opportunities ahead for Asia's financial hub, Hong Kong? Let's find out. Of Hong Kong business environment. Joining us, Edward Xie, Chairman and CEO of Gaofeng Advisory Company. He's based in Hong Kong. Edward, good to see you once again.
Oh, thank you, Tian Wei. How are you?
Very good. And it seems that Hong Kong is getting better. That's even more important.
Yes, things are stabilized quite a bit already since the national security law was put in place, as well as the electoral reform that happened. Things are stabilized quite a bit now.
Business environment report, according to Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, has been quite in a better place, a U-turn, some even say.
Yeah, somewhat. The GDP has rebounded quite a bit. I believe the first half of the GDP growth was over 7%. And the prediction for the rest of the year, for the entire year, is over 6%, which is obviously not too bad. And I think some of the trade numbers are also very positive, over 20% growth and so on. So in general, the economy in Hong Kong has rebounded quite a bit from the pit of the pandemic situation.
National security law, elections, and also the calming down of the social environment, all these Hong Kong has managed to accomplish, but it was tough. And probably more tough battles ahead. So political battles, I mean. So Edward, how are businesses assessing the environment in Hong Kong for the middle and the long term?
Yeah, in general, the short-term impact are, of course, the social unrest in the last couple of years. and also the pandemic, as well as the overall geopolitical conditions. But businesses also continue to see the underpins for Hong Kong's economic success and the future of Hong Kong. So most, if not all, the businesses are staying in Hong Kong and continue to really try to see how to work within the Hong Kong context to benefit from the continual rebound and recovery of the Hong Kong conditions. And from many businesses' standpoint, they're looking at Hong Kong, not only from the standpoint of only Hong Kong, they're looking at Hong Kong as part of the Greater Bay Area. Increasingly, there's more activities that's cross-border between Hong Kong and Guangdong province to continue to boost the potential of the Greater Bay Area. So that's a big area for the Hong Kong investors. In a way, we're pretty lucky because we are part of China. And China, I think we all know the size of it, the growth of it, and how China is really treating Hong Kong with a very really privileged position of being a special administrative region of China. The next step for Hong Kong is to really to leverage the advantages that it can enjoy from being part of China and being part of the Greater Bay Area. At the same time, maintain its position as an international financial center which serves the rest of the world.
Another thing, Hong Kong during this process is also trying to seek its own, shall we say, blue map about its future. Some of the actions being taken by the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region government is inspiring. For example, the West Kowloon Cultural District. That is an effort for Hong Kong to diversify and to make Hong Kong not just two-dimension, but multiple dimensions. Yet people also complain about the speed of development about that project, and people expect, when is Hong Kong going to be able to, present to the world a different image? So, Edward, what about, Hong Kong's efforts in that direction?
I think the direction is there, and in a way, the commitment is also there. I think what it comes down to is the ability to really implement, against the policy that's already been set out.
Right.
In general, it's a good blueprint for Hong Kong to become more diversified, beyond just being a financial center, perhaps including cultural, but also importantly on innovation, technology innovation, where Hong Kong really has suffered over the last several decades, while Shenzhen and Dongguan have really done a much better job. So I think it's very important for Hong Kong government, from the execution standpoint, to really make these things happen. Right now, somehow these are not really that smoothly carried out, even though the blueprint is pretty clear. It's a lot of internal bureaucratic red tapes that can, in my view, can be worked out. But it requires really the true commitment and courage from the SAR government. Certainly, there are many areas of developments in China, and the China blueprint is very impressive. And over the last several decades, we have seen how the China strategy coming from Beijing actually have worked, largely speaking. Hong Kong will have to be part of the China plan. Hong Kong also can remain its own very specialized conditions, but at the same time, Hong Kong's got to be a part of the China plan. In my view, it doesn't really matter, from a GDP measure standpoint, how high Hong Kong is going to be compared to these other cities in China and so on. I think what's important is what is the specific and special role that Hong Kong can play that very few other cities in China can play on behalf of China, and for the matter for the rest of the world. I think Hong Kong does have that unique position. It's a matter for Hong Kong to really fully leverage that, i.e. the unique position of Hong Kong on an international basis, at the same time Hong Kong being part of China and in particular part of Greater Bay Area.
Edward Shi, always a pleasure. Thank you so much, and all the best to Hong Kong, of course. And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for watching.